The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against my windshield as if the sky itself was trying to wash the world clean. It was close to midnight, and the highway stretched out ahead of me like a dark, endless ribbon. I live in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio, and on nights like this, the roads are usually empty. I had just finished a late shift at the auto shop, bone-tired and thinking only about getting home to my daughter, Lily. My name is Michael Harris. I'm 42 years old, a single father, and for most of my life, I've been just a quiet man who fixes cars and minds his own business. I've seen my fair share of trouble, sure, but nothing that prepared me for what happened that night. As my wipers struggled against the storm, I noticed something ahead on the road, at first just a dark shape, lying motionless in the rain. My stomach tightened. At that hour, on that kind of deserted road, it could have been anything. I slowed down, headlights cutting through the downpour, and then I saw it clearly. It was a man. He was slumped across the shoulder, his clothes soaked, and even from inside my car, I could see the red stains mixing with the water. His face was bloodied, his hands trembling weakly as if he was fighting to stay conscious. My first instinct screamed at me to keep driving, because where I come from, nothing good happens when you stop for strangers on a lonely road. But another part of me, the part that still believes in doing the right thing, wouldn't let me leave him there to die. I pulled over, heart pounding. Rain soaked through my jacket instantly as I rushed to his side. "Hey, can you hear me?" I shouted over the storm. His eyes fluttered open, blood trailing from a cut on his forehead. "Please," he whispered, barely audible. "Hospital, help me." Those words hooked me deep. Without thinking twice, I half-carried, half-dragged him to my car and pushed him into the passenger seat. His weight was heavy, his body limp, but I managed to get him in. My hands were shaking as I slammed the door and sped toward the nearest hospital, tires splashing through puddles. He didn't say much during the ride, just groaned, coughed, and clutched at his side. I kept telling him to hold on, that he was going to be fine. Every few seconds, I glanced at him, worried that he might not even make it. When we finally reached the emergency entrance, I threw the car into park and waved frantically for help. Nurses and orderlies rushed out with a gurney, and I helped them lift him onto it. Within moments, he disappeared behind swinging double doors. I stood there, drenched, breathing hard, staring at the red streaks he'd left on my passenger seat. For a moment, I felt proud. I had saved a life, or at least given him a chance. But as I walked back to my car, something in the pit of my stomach twisted. I couldn't explain it then. All I knew was that I had done the right thing. What I didn't know was that my decision that night would come back to destroy my life. Because the very next morning, just as I was pouring my first cup of coffee, there was a knock on my front door. People often say that when life decides to change, it doesn't knock gently, it barges in like a storm. But before that night on the highway, my life was simple. Predictable, even. I live in a modest two-bedroom house just outside of Columbus. It's nothing fancy. Paint peeling on the shutters, a squeaky screen door that I keep promising myself I'll fix, but it's ours. I bought it after my divorce 6 years ago, and it's where I've been raising my daughter, Lily. She's 12 now, smart as a whip, with a smile that can cut right through the worst of my days. Every decision I've made in the last decade has been about giving her a decent life. I'm a mechanic by trade. I run a little auto shop on the edge of town, Harris Auto. Most of my customers are regulars, folks who've known me since high school. Business is steady, not booming, but enough to pay the bills and keep food on the table. There are weeks when I worry about rent, about medical insurance, about whether I can buy Lily that new pair of sneakers she's been eyeing, but I manage. Somehow, I always manage. It wasn't always this way. Before the divorce, I thought I had it all figured out. I was married young, right after leaving the Army. I served 14 years as a mechanic in the service, fixing engines under desert heat, patching together machines that weren't supposed to run but had to. Those years taught me discipline, patience, and how to stay calm when everything around me was falling apart. But they didn't prepare me for betrayal. My ex-wife decided one day that she wanted something more, something I couldn't give her, apparently. She walked out, left me with a little girl to raise, and never looked back. At first, it broke me. I'll admit it. I wasn't sure I could do it, be both mom and dad, hold down a business, keep the house from falling apart. But Lily saved me. Every morning when she came downstairs in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes, asking for pancakes or cereal, it reminded me that giving up wasn't an option. So I built routines. Mornings were for Lily, breakfast, drop off at school. Days were for the shop, oil changes, brake jobs, the occasional engine rebuild. Evenings were for homework, dinner, and sometimes, if I wasn't too tired, a movie on the couch with popcorn. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And honestly, I thought I had finally found peace. I was cautious by nature. I didn't trust easily anymore. When neighbors invited me out, I usually said no. When strangers asked for help, I hesitated. It wasn't that I had stopped caring. It was just that I had learned the hard way that good intentions could leave scars. But Lily, she had a way of softening me. She'd say things like, "Dad, you always told me we should help people, even if it's hard." And maybe that's why, when I saw that man bleeding on the road, I couldn't just drive away. Looking back, there were little signs, moments that should have told me my life wasn't as stable as I thought. Bills piling higher. That strange phone call I got one night where the line was silent, as if someone was listening. The uneasy feeling when I locked up the shop and noticed a black sedan parked across the street, lights off, engine running. I brushed it all off. After years of hardship, you train yourself not to overreact. But the truth is, I wanted to believe I was finally safe. I wanted to believe that for once, the worst had already happened, and the future was about building, not breaking. That's what made that night feel almost symbolic. The storm outside mirrored the storm I'd fought through in my life. And helping that stranger? In my mind, it was proof that I hadn't lost my humanity. Even after everything, I went to bed, after dropping him at the hospital with a strange sort of pride. Lily was asleep, her bedroom light casting a soft glow under her door. I looked at her and thought, "Your dad did the right thing tonight." I had no way of knowing that my choice was about to pull us both into a nightmare. The next morning started like any other. The rain had cleared, leaving the world fresh and quiet. I got up early, made coffee, started frying eggs for breakfast. Lily padded into the kitchen, yawning, hair a mess, asking if she could skip school because she was too tired. I laughed, kissed the top of her head, and told her nice try. It felt like any other day. Normal. Safe. Until I heard it. A knock at the door. Firm. Repeated. I frowned, wiping my hands on a towel. Visitors at that hour were rare. Neighbors usually called first, and deliveries didn't come before 9. Something about the sound of that knock, it wasn't casual. It was sharp, deliberate. I glanced at Lily. "Finish your breakfast," I told her, keeping my voice calm. But inside, something in me had already shifted. When I opened the door, my entire world tilted on its axis. Standing on my porch were 2 police officers. Rain still dripped from the brim of their hats. One of them held a notepad, the other rested a hand on his belt. "Mr. Harris?" the taller one asked. "Yes. We need to talk about last night." The moment the taller officer spoke, I felt my throat tighten. "Last night," he repeated, flipping open his notepad. "You were driving on Route 19, correct?" I nodded slowly. Yes. I was heading home from work. The officer exchanged a quick glance with his partner. Witnesses reported a vehicle matching your car's description leaving the scene of an incident. A man was found badly injured, and we believe he may have been involved in a violent altercation before you picked him up. My chest went cold. I swallowed hard. Wait, you think I... No. No, I didn't hurt him. I found him lying on the road. I helped him. I drove him straight to the hospital. The shorter officer, a stocky man with sharp eyes, leaned forward slightly. That's what we're trying to confirm. Do you mind if we take a look at your car? My instinct was to protest, but before I could, Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, clutching her cereal bowl. Dad? What's going on? The taller officer softened his tone. Don't worry, sweetheart. We just need to ask your dad a few questions. I forced a smile toward her. It's fine, Lily. Go finish your breakfast. She hesitated, eyes wide with fear, then disappeared back into the kitchen. I stepped outside, shutting the door behind me. The rain-washed air felt heavy on my skin. They walked me to my car, and the moment I opened the passenger door, I realized how it looked. The seat was still stained, dark smears of blood soaking into the fabric. I had scrubbed it half-heartedly the night before, but exhaustion had won out. Now, under the officer's watchful eyes, it looked damning. The stocky one let out a low whistle. That's a lot of blood, Mr. Harris. I told you, I insisted, voice shaking. He was half dead when I found him. I didn't do this. I saved him. The taller officer scribbled something in his notebook. Do you know his name? I shook my head. No. I never asked. He could barely talk. That answer seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Both men looked at me as though they weren't sure whether to believe me. We'll need you to come down to the station and give a statement, the tall one finally said. You're not under arrest, but you understand how this looks. I felt my stomach twist. My hands itched to slam the car door, to shout that they were wasting time. But I knew better. Losing my temper wouldn't help. So I nodded, jaw tight. Fine. I'll come in. At the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The questions came rapid fire. Where exactly had I found him? What time? What words did he say? Did I notice anything unusual? Tattoos, clothing, weapons? I answered everything as honestly as I could, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. To them, I wasn't a good Samaritan. I was a man with blood in his car, no witnesses, and a shaky story about helping a stranger. When they finally let me go, the sun was setting. I drove home with a knot in my chest, my mind replaying every second of that night. Why had I stopped? Why hadn't I just kept driving? But the real fear settled in when I checked my voicemail later that evening. A message from an unknown number. A man's voice, low, distorted, almost taunting. You should have kept driving, Harris. Now it's too late. I froze, phone pressed to my ear, my blood turning to ice. Too late for what? The days that followed blurred together in a haze of suspicion. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me. At the grocery store, neighbors whispered, their gazes darting toward me. At the shop, customers avoided conversation. Even Lily noticed. Dad, why is everyone looking at you weird? She asked one night. I wanted to tell her the truth, that her father had walked into a trap he didn't see coming. But instead, I just smiled tightly and said, Don't worry about it, kiddo. People gossip. It'll pass. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't. The police came back twice more, asking for clarification, digging into my background. My army service. My divorce. My finances. It felt less like they were searching for the man I had helped, and more like they were trying to prove I was guilty of something. And then, the final straw, I learned from a nurse at the hospital that the bloodied man had checked himself out less than 12 hours after being admitted. No discharge papers, no explanation, he just vanished. Gone. The realization hit me like a hammer. Whoever he was, he hadn't been some innocent victim. He had been running from something, or someone. And now, he had left me behind as the perfect scapegoat. That night, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the rain streaking the window. Lily was asleep upstairs. The house was quiet, but my mind was anything but. I replayed every second in my head. His weak voice. "Hospital, help me!" His trembling hands. The way he slumped into my seat without hesitation. It wasn't desperation. It was strategy. He had used me. And worse, he had made sure the evidence would point straight back at me. I clenched my fists, breathing hard. For years, I had kept my head down, lived an honest life, tried to be a good man. And with one decision, one act of kindness, I was about to lose everything. But then, in the middle of my spiraling thoughts, something inside me went still. A single, razor-sharp moment of clarity. If he thought he could frame me and disappear, he was wrong. Because I was going to find him. And when I did, I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to make him pay. The sleepless nights were the worst. I'd sit in the living room long after Lily had gone to bed, staring at the muted TV screen while my mind replayed every second of that rainy night. Every sound outside made me flinch. Every car that slowed in front of the house made my stomach twist. The police hadn't arrested me, but their visits made it clear. They saw me less as a good Samaritan and more as a suspect who hadn't yet slipped up. I knew I needed answers. But the hospital staff had little to give. The man had signed himself out under a fake name, left behind no belongings, and slipped away without a trace. It was as if he'd never existed. Still, I couldn't let it go. Something deep inside me screamed that I was missing a piece of the puzzle. That piece arrived 1 week later. I was closing up the shop when my old army buddy, Chris, stopped by. He'd heard whispers about me through town and wanted to check in. Chris now worked part-time with local law enforcement. Nothing official, but enough to have access to certain records. "You're not gonna like this," he said, sliding a manila envelope across my workbench. Inside were still shots from a nearby traffic camera. Grainy, rain-streaked, but clear enough. One frame showed my car pulled to the shoulder that night. Another showed me hauling the bloodied man into the passenger seat. But it was the third image that froze me cold. A black sedan parked less than 100 yards away, lights off, angled perfectly toward my car. Chris tapped the photo. "That vehicle's been flagged in a string of armed robberies across the county. Same MO, in and out before police arrive. Someone always ends up in the hospital." I stared at the photo until my vision blurred. That sedan hadn't just been there by coincidence. They had been watching, waiting, and I was their perfect pawn. The rage that boiled up inside me was unlike anything I'd felt before. I'd lost a marriage, a home, years of my life to struggle, but never had someone deliberately tried to destroy me for sport. Now I saw it clearly. The man I had helped wasn't just unlucky. He was bait. A wounded decoy tossed into my path so I could carry him, like a mule, straight into the system. His blood in my car, his presence in my passenger seat, it was all designed to pin the blame on me while his crew vanished into the storm. I gripped the edge of the workbench so hard my knuckles went white. That was the moment. The moment I knew my life had been hijacked, my reputation poisoned, my freedom dangling by a thread. And in that same moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for justice to magically arrive. I wasn't going to let the whispers in town bury me alive. I was going to hunt them. I was going to take back my life with the same precision I had once used in the army, quiet, deliberate, unstoppable. Chris must have seen the fire in my eyes, because he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Mike, whatever you're thinking, be careful. These guys aren't small time. They're connected. Dangerous." I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I've spent my whole life fixing broken things," I said quietly. "This time, I'm fixing my own." That night, I tucked Lily into bed, kissed her forehead, and stood at her door a little longer than usual. I told myself everything I was about to do was for her, for us. Because no matter what it took, no matter how long it took, I was going to clear my name. And I was going to make the man I saved wish he had died on that rainy road. Once the decision settled in my chest, it felt like a switch had been flipped. Fear turned into focus. Doubt turned into discipline. The army had trained me for this: patience, observation, precision. And if those men thought I'd roll over while they dismantled my life, they had chosen the wrong target. The first step was information. Chris gave me a head start. That black sedan had been tied to robberies, but the cops had little to go on. I couldn't rely on them. I needed my own trail. So every night, after Lily went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, writing down every detail I remembered. The man's face. His wounds. The way he said, "hospital," like it was rehearsed, not desperate. Patterns emerged the more I wrote. His jacket had been torn, but not randomly. Clean slash marks, like from a knife fight. His boots had mud caked on them, but not from the roadside. It was thick, clay-like, the kind you'd only find near the riverbank a few miles out. And when he coughed in my car, I remembered the faint smell of smoke clinging to him. Burnt rubber, maybe gasoline. These weren't random details. They were breadcrumbs. Next, I quietly reached out to an old contact, Sergeant Daniels, retired now, who ran a small security company. I told him half the truth, that I was being set up and needed eyes on the ground. No names, no specifics. Just that I was looking for a black sedan tied to robberies. He owed me a favor from overseas, and he agreed to put a couple of guys on it. No questions asked. Meanwhile, I started covering my own tracks. I cleaned the blood from my car thoroughly, scrubbing until my hands bled. I organized my financial records, business receipts, and even my army files. If the cops came sniffing again, I'd leave them nothing but order and consistency. But I didn't stop there. I also began shadowing my own town. Late at night, I'd drive routes the black sedan might take. Abandoned warehouses, old industrial yards, even the riverbank trails. My mechanic's eyes picked up things others might overlook. Fresh tire marks, oil leaks, scraps of fabric caught on chain-link fences. It didn't take long before I found something that made my heart race. At the far end of an abandoned lot, hidden behind rusted machinery, were fresh tracks. Wide tire imprints, deep from weight, consistent with a sedan. And scattered nearby, cigarette butts and an empty whiskey bottle. They had been here. I didn't approach directly. Instead, I marked the area mentally and drove past like I hadn't noticed. Because this wasn't about rushing in. This was about letting them think they were invisible while I built my net tighter and tighter around them. At home, I grew quieter. Lily noticed. "Dad, are you okay? You've been different." I forced a smile. "Just tired, sweetheart. Work's been rough." She didn't press, but I could see the worry in her eyes. It only fueled me more. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for her future, for the roof over her head, for the chance to live without whispers and pointing fingers. I began documenting everything digitally, too. Photos of tire tracks, time-stamped notes of suspicious cars, even recordings of late-night calls I started receiving. Because the calls didn't stop. Always the same voice, distorted, mocking. "You should have stayed quiet. You'll regret picking him up. People will believe what we tell them." The first few calls rattled me. But soon, I began to see them for what they were, not warnings, but signs of fear. They knew I was a loose end, one they hadn't tied off properly. And now, the more they tried to intimidate me, the more it confirmed I was on the right path. A breakthrough came 2 weeks later. Daniel's men spotted the black sedan parked outside a rundown bar near the county line. They sent me photos. Even through the grainy images, I recognized him, the bloodied man. Alive, well, laughing with 2 others, like he hadn't tried to ruin my life. I stared at that photo for hours, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. There he was. My victim. Drinking. Breathing. Free. That was the moment my plan shifted from defense to offense. I didn't want just to clear my name anymore. I wanted to make sure that when the truth came out, there would be no escaping it. No loopholes. No chance for him, or his crew, to twist the story again. So I started building a case the way I knew best, methodical, piece by piece. I purchased a cheap secondhand camera and staked out the bar. For 3 nights straight, I sat in my truck across the street, watching him. He always arrived after dark, always with the same 2 men. They spoke to no one else, kept to themselves, and left just before closing. On the 4th night, I followed them, at a distance. My headlights off, my engine humming low. They drove back toward the industrial yards. Right to the same abandoned lot where I'd seen the tracks before. Now I had photos of them entering, time-stamped. Proof of their hideout. And still, I stayed patient. Because revenge isn't about striking fast. It's about striking right. Back at the shop, I began preparing in other ways. I installed hidden cameras in my office and garage, just in case they tried to corner me there. I upgraded my locks, reinforced the back door, even trained Lily on what to do if strangers ever came knocking. She thought it was a fire drill. She didn't need to know the truth yet. I also reached out quietly to a lawyer in town, sliding her some of the evidence I gathered. I didn't explain everything, just told her I suspected foul play and wanted protection. Planting seeds, so that when the time came, people would believe me. Every move I made was calculated. Every night I grew sharper, calmer, more focused. The man I had saved thought he'd chosen the perfect patsy. But he didn't realize he had given me a target. And targets are meant to be hit. I'd rehearsed the plan in my head so many times the steps felt like muscle memory. Chris and Daniels had their roles. Chris would feed anything he pulled from police channels back to me, and Daniels would provide the backup, men who could move without drawing county attention. My part was to stay invisible, to bait without being bitten. We picked a night when the bar closed late and the rain flirted with the forecast, just enough to keep the streets empty, just enough to blur faces a little in the grainy photos I planned to use later. I parked 2 blocks away in a van Daniels provided, battery running low so it wouldn't broadcast any signal. I had the cheap camera in my lap, my phone on airplane mode except for one burner line Chris would use to call. I tasted metal in my mouth and told myself to breathe. They arrived exactly like the past photos, 3 men, the bloody guy in the middle, laughing loud enough to scare away small talk. I followed at a distance as they left, careful to stay in shadowed alleys, watching as headlights disappeared toward the industrial lot. My heart beat steady. Fear had been replaced entirely by focus. We waited until they split, 2 men slipping between rusted machines, the third heading toward a back trailer. That's when Chris's voice cracked in my ear, low and steady. Ow! Daniel's men moved like ghosts. They didn't rush. They cleared exits and approached the group in pairs. I circled to the other side of the compound, where the trailer's back door sat slightly ajar, the kind of mistake amateurs make when they think no one is watching. I kept to the shadows, the cheap camera hidden under my jacket. When they opened the door, the smell hit me first, stale smoke, the metallic tang of oil, the same burnt rubber scent I'd remembered. But the thing that turned my stomach was how ordinary the scene looked. A few folding chairs, a cooler, a handgun tucked under a tarp. The bloodied man, alive and too comfortable, was arguing with a fourth guy I hadn't seen before. My finger tightened on the camera trigger. Daniel's men called out, voices calm but authoritative. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" Chaos happened in a few sharp seconds. The men moved to run. One tried to shove past, and Daniel's backup slammed him into a stack of pallets. Another dove toward his car and got tackled. The bloodied man stood still for a beat, too surprised to move, and that's when I stepped forward. I didn't need to throw a punch. I needed him to look at me. I needed him to understand the face in front of him was the one he'd used like a shield. I stepped into the light, camera steady in my hand, and took a photo of his face, a real close-up, the kind that clings to the memory. He met my eyes, and for a second I thought he might lunge. Instead, he flinched. That flinch was an admission. Daniel's men cuffed them, read them their rights in a gravelly chorus. Chris called the local detective and slid copies of the photos and time-stamps across his desk. We had the sedan's plate, the lot's coordinates, multiple eyewitness logs from Daniel's guys who'd been watching the crew for weeks. The evidence was clean and cold. No holes, no maybe. The kind of case a DA can't ignore. They transported them in separate squad cars. As they drove away, I stood by the trailer and let the adrenaline ebb. For the first time in months, the pressure under my ribs loosened. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Standing vindicated, proof in hand, the town seeing me as I actually was. But the real world is never that tidy. The DA wanted more before they filed major charges. Court prefers paper to passion. So we fed the paper. Chris and Daniels handed over surveillance footage, timestamp photos, the empty whiskey bottle with fingerprints Daniel's men had dusted for prints. My cheap camera footage matched the timestamps. The bloodied man's prints matched old arrest records Chris dug from a back channel. The black sedan's plate traced to a shell company. It all threaded together like a rope. Meanwhile, I didn't go public. I let the people who'd whispered and pointed keep doing it. That would change. I let the legal machinery turn, slow but inevitable. When the indictments finally arrived, they were precise. Robbery, assault, conspiracy, obstruction. The county paper ran an article with photos supplied by the police. Photos Chris had slipped them legally, the kind the public eats up. The headline read, "Ring behind county robberies broken. Suspects arrested." My name didn't appear, but the piece cleared the pattern that had connected the sedan and the crew to the attacks, pieces that matched the night I'd stopped on Route 19. It didn't end there. We wanted public confession. We wanted the bloodied man to explain why he'd left the hospital and how he'd used me. So Daniels and I arranged a quiet sting, recorded questioning with a prosecutor present. We baited him with the one thing criminals always chase: leverage. "We can make your sentence lighter if you help us tie the rest together," they said on tape. He talked. He named names. He described how they'd use people as bait to slip their loot past witnesses. He laughed about how easy it was to get someone to do the dirty work: a wounded actor, a stage scene, and a man with a slow heart and quick conscience. When the tape played in the DA's office, it sounded worse than anything I'd imagined. His own words, cold and casual, laid out the entire operation. The prosecutor played the clip for the judge at the preliminary hearing. The courtroom went still. You could feel the breath of the city catch at once. Then came the part I'd wanted most. The newspapers, the local channels, the town's group chats. The bloodied man's name was printed beside his confession. The photos of their sedan matched the grainy image people had seen online. The logical thread that had once pointed to me snapped. People began to piece together, that the evidence had been manufactured. Headline shifted. Whispers died. I sat in a plastic chair in the gallery when the judge read the bind. Denials, guilty pleas, the DA's closing that left no space for doubt. I watched the bloodied man look small in the witness stand, how he avoided my eyes. When the judge banged the gavel on the first conviction, sound ricocheted in a way that made something inside me unclench. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't a parade. A quiet nod from the prosecutor, a few murmurs from reporters. But it was enough. The knot of fear around my life began to loosen, strand by strand. When I finally drove home that night, the town still had its echoes. Some faces on Main Street still spared a glance. But the looks weren't the same. They were apologetic, curious, relieved. The worst of it was lifting. I walked in the door and saw Lily asleep on the couch, the TV on a muted cartoon, her homework half finished. I sat down across from her and let the silence breathe for a long minute. I didn't need to say everything. She'd seen me fight before, just not like this. I poured a cup of coffee and thought about the cost. I had bent rules, lied about small things to protect the investigation, put myself in danger. I'd woken nights thinking of what more they could take. Revenge had a price. But as I watched her sleep, I understood why I'd paid it. The next morning the town would gossip. People would say a mechanic had taken down a ring. They'd call it luck, or justice, or something else entirely. I didn't care what they called it. What mattered was that when the chips fell, I had been the one to pick them up. The house was quiet in a way I hadn't known in months. No police knocking on the door. No whispers chasing me down grocery aisles. No restless nights staring at the ceiling wondering if I'd ever clear my name. Just quiet. Lily and I moved back into a rhythm that felt almost normal. I fixed up the old Chevy in the driveway, cooked breakfast on Sundays, helped her with algebra homework that I barely remembered from my own school days. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me, really watching, as if she was trying to measure if I was the same man I'd been before the storm. And maybe I wasn't. I had always thought of myself as someone who fixed things with his hands. Cars, tractors, busted tools. But what I'd learned was that sometimes life breaks in ways you can't hammer back together. Sometimes the fixing isn't about bolts and wires, but about facing the dark corners you never thought you'd step into. The town shifted too. People who had once avoided eye contact now stopped me on the street. A few even apologized, awkwardly, clumsy in their guilt. I didn't hold it against them. Fear makes people believe what's easiest. And for a while, I had been the easiest target. I didn't need their apologies. The courtroom, the confessions, the arrests, they had already given me back what I needed, my dignity. My name. The chance to look my daughter in the eyes without shame weighing on me like chains. Still, the nights carried a different kind of silence. I thought about the men sitting in cells, the bloodied one who had once staggered into my passenger seat like a drowning man grabbing a life raft. I wondered if he thought about me at all, if he replayed the look on my face the night I saw him laugh in that trailer, alive and unbroken. Revenge doesn't erase memories. It doesn't give you back the months you lost, the friendships strained, the sleep stolen. But it does something else. It gives you the strength to stop being a victim. And that, I realized, was enough. I began taking small jobs again, fixing engines, tuning up trucks. Work came slower than before, but steady enough. I didn't rush it. Each repaired engine felt like proof that life could still run smoothly, even after the storm had nearly destroyed the road. One evening, Chris stopped by. He leaned against the hood of my Chevy, sipping coffee from a paper cup. "You did good, Mike," he said quietly. "Most people would have folded." I smiled, though it was tired. "Most people don't have Lily." He nodded. That was all that needed saying. Because at the end of it, every decision I'd made, the long nights, the risks, The quiet rage I'd carried wasn't about proving myself to the town, or even to the men who tried to break me. It was about her. Making sure she grew up knowing her father fought, not just with fists, but with truth. One rainy morning months later, I found myself back on Route 19. I'd taken a detour after finishing a job, maybe out of habit, maybe out of something deeper. The road looked the same. Slick asphalt, trees bending in the wind, the faint smell of wet earth rising from the ditches. I pulled over where it had all started. Sat there for a while, listening to the engine tick in the quiet drizzle. That night had nearly ended me, but it had also reshaped me. It taught me that sometimes helping someone comes at a cost you never imagined. And sometimes, the fight for justice isn't loud. It's patient, it's deliberate, it's choosing not to break when the world tries to bend you. I started the car again, rolled back onto the road, and let the rain wash the windshield clean. And as the wipers beat their steady rhythm, I whispered something I hadn't said out loud in months. She took everything, except my soul. And from that, I rebuilt my life, not for her, not for revenge, but for me.